yeah, it kind of really catalyzed something in me, an incredibly beautiful experience when it first opened. And I was in 2 days of bliss. It was absolute, like a full body orgasmic experience. It was just incredible. And I thought, what is happening? In fact, it was probably get to the point where it got too intense. But then it was just like, wow. Everything looked sacred. People looked sacred. I was full of love. And it was an amazing experience. Then it started to slip down. And I've always questioned, well, that's what took me on a journey of self-awareness and discovery after I'd got through the experience, because it's a little bit like, I'll say a little bit like my ego was quite fragile. And, when you have a powerful experience like that, it couldn't hold it. But there's one thing that happened, is that it's more like the experience was so powerful, it eclipsed the ego, which means it didn't knock the ego out of function completely, but the ego was then in the background, while the process, all the stuff from the unconscious that came up, was in the foreground. So that 2-day beautiful experience opened me up, but because I didn't have a strong enough ego structure to integrate it, it eclipsed the ego, and then I was in pretty much the unconscious just coming up willy-nilly. And to be quite honest with you, I mean, I was hanging on for a couple of years, about the best part of 2 years, to get through that process, with just all my repressed shadow experiences coming up, really quite horrible impulses, violent thoughts, extreme emotions, panic, all flooding up, and I had no sense of how to get through it. So yes, there was no map.
Can I just ask you a question, Mick? Because I think something that you raised there is so important, and this has come up kind of time and time again with stuff I've read and people I've spoken to and research. You mentioned that you didn't go into deep kind of meditative practice, and that you had like a not strong sense of self or ego structure, which is that why you think that you were kind of shattered more easily? And
yes,
do you think it's more likely for people to have a quick awakening or an easier shattering when they have trauma in childhood, or kind of a less structured sense of self in early age?
I mean, I think it's a great question, and to be honest, I don't think anyone can give the complete answer that covers every permutation, because psychically, psychologically, we're very complex human beings. However, I think for people who've had a relatively straightforward upbringing, who've been nurtured and loved and cared for in a way that creates a sort of an ego that can adjust and accommodate different experiences. And as Jung would say, there's an ego self with a capital S encounter. So you can start to absorb elements of the unconscious and integrate it. So it becomes not an eclipse. I think when you're absolutely right, in my case, I had a lot of fracture lines in my experience, and I had a lot of repressed shadow material, which for various reasons in childhood happened, and that suppression and that poorly adjusted ego structure, for various reasons, the way I was socialized, and not so much socialized by anyone, but my circumstances. I was jumping around from place to place because my parents were moving all the time, so no stable structures really. I was also adopted. There was a lots going on that actually meant I was a bit like easily blown in the wind. So when that experience did come up, you're absolutely right. There was a fracturing and an eclipse. So what fragments of the ego that were sort of trying to function to work through the experience were still there. So I was realizing there were some elements of me that was able to manage bits of my experience. And so, right, I'm going to get up this morning, I'm going to have a bite to eat. There's no food in the house, I'll have to go to the shops. I was able to do that, but what was raging in me was almost barely containable. And there were times when I had to lock myself away and just cut myself off from lots of different people because I was in a really extreme state.
So you were never hospitalized, were you, or labeled? No. So how did you manage to get through that without kind of going down that road?
to put no finer point on it, I mean, to show the level of distress when all that shadow material come up, which is that's the map I've got for it now, that the unconscious just flew up. I was also having Kundalini-like experiences, heat in around the stomach, very subtle vibrations. I was also seeing light and color around, little small balls of light around people's heads and what have you. And so all sorts of things were kicking off, but this raging shadow stuff was coming up as well. And I think there was something about that was overwhelming. But where I was very lucky, a psychologist who had been formerly a monk, he was in his 60s, in the 80s, had been a monk in India, a sort of a mendicant wandering around India. He'd been very close working with Krishnamurti, and a real knowledgeable person. He knew a lot about Jung and all sorts of manner of stuff. And he'd heard that I was going through this experience and somehow got a message to me, because like in those days, there was no mobile phones and internet. I didn't even have a phone in the house I was living in. So I can't even remember how it happened, but a message came, Arvind, wants to be in touch. And somehow I got in touch with him. I was in North Wales. He lived in Shropshire. It wasn't too far. And I spent the weekend with him. And over the 2 and a bit years that I saw him 3 times, and he gave me a gift, an absolute gift, because he said he recognized what was happening. He said, Mick, if you can tolerate this, you're having an awakening, and you're going to have to, this is going to be something you're going to have to go through. Mm-hmm. So he taught me the idea of Krishnamurti's choiceless awareness, and I just used that. But more importantly, it wasn't just that I was thinking, just let it pass, let it pass. And when you're doing that for 2 years, let it pass, you think, is this ever going to end? I thought I was evil. How the heck I managed to contain that, I don't know. But his words, not only his words of just see yourself through this process as best you can, but the fact that he didn't run out the room screaming when I told him what I was going through.
Yeah, or medicate you, or try to change it, or tell you there's something wrong with you.
He wouldn't have had the opportunity to do that, because he wasn't doing it in a capacity to be able to.
No, but I'm just kind of referring to like the research, and what you say is exactly. I mean, it shows how powerful and profound experiences you can be having, but that they can be managed. And this is the difference, and this is the whole point of the campaign, isn't it? To say, okay, we're trying to prove that the research says somebody just needs validation. They need to know that the process they're going through is real, it's actually happening, and it's okay, it comes to an end. And that's sometimes all that somebody needs, actually, to get them through, and that's exactly what you seem to be saying.
Well, that's right. And I think that his kindness was something that was really key for me, because actually being validated is one thing, but to be in a space with somebody who's just looking at you with genuine care and compassion and kindness, who isn't saying, I think you're ill or sick, who's saying, treat this really carefully, but actually you're going to have to go through it. The only way is through,